Hello, I'm going to talk today about how long it takes us to do a lesson of phonics in the first grade Ron staff curriculum for my 5-year-old. We've done 2 weeks of school so far, and it's going well. It takes us about 30 minutes to do a lesson. This is a teacher's manual. So in the teacher's manual, there's some scripted part of the lesson. I have not done every single part of this scripted part of the lesson. It says things that you're supposed to write on the chalkboard. I don't have or use a chalkboard, and sometimes I'll use a piece of paper to write some of these things, or sometimes I will just turn to a page in his actual phonics workbook. For example, like today we were doing some syllables with where you have a consonant and you add a vowel. And we were supposed to review some of these at the beginning of our lesson. They're in this edge row, which you're supposed to read at the end of the lesson. And as the teacher's manual says, to write some of these on your chalkboard and have them review these sounds before you start your lesson, which I do think the review is very important. I just don't write it on the chalkboard. I just turn to this workbook and have him review them on his edge list that he's going to be reading at the end of his lesson. So I go over the sounds and review them with him and have him make sure that he still remembers it and goes over it again. So I did the same thing at the beginning of the book when it was about identifying these letters. He already knew this, so I wasn't teaching this or introducing it for the first time. But I didn't write on the chalkboard all these rows of letters and have him identify which ones were which. There was plenty of that in his workbook. This is exactly what his workbook looks like. This is in the teacher's manual. But there's rows of letters to distinguish which letters are the A, uppercase and lowercase. So he got plenty of practice with that. I didn't feel the need to go through this step. Each lesson in the beginning introduced a vowel with a short sound. This is still part of the first lesson with the letter A says ah. There's these are word lists, and the student is supposed to distinguish whether the word begins with an ah or not. So the teacher is to say these words to the student, and the student is to indicate whether it does start with an ah or not. And I don't feel the need to read all these words. The more challenging ones, sometimes I would pick a few from here, I would pick a few from here, and once I knew that he understood, he was catching on, then I didn't continue and overstress the point. There were some letters, like when we got to lesson that was about eh and it, he would sometimes get those confused, and so I would go a little farther into this, and I did finish it. I think a couple times I finished the whole list of words where he was distinguishing whether it did start with an eh or not, or the words where the word did start with an I or not. But I didn't always go through that. And I was keeping in mind this is made to be used in a classroom, so sometimes you're repeating these, and some of the students aren't catching on right away, and so you have to keep going. But when you're doing it one-on-one, you know whether they're catching on, and you don't have to keep going, because you can gauge by your child's adequacy, and the next day you're going to review, and you're going to know if he caught on, and you can adjust then if you need to do go further in the lesson or not. So the first lessons are about the vowels, and these are the 4 work pages. So I was saying I start with the teacher's manual, and I do go over the things they want to review in here, but I don't always do every little thing that's in the script. And maybe it's also because I've done this a year before, and I kind of know my way around it a little bit. So I will do some of the stuff the teacher manual said, teach the lesson, and then the student has 4 work pages in here. And I don't always wait to read everything in here to start this. Sometimes I'll just start this, and as we're going along in this, teach the sounds that we're supposed to be learning, and how to write it, dictate it to the child, and then have them write it themselves. The teacher's manual talked about how it's very important to not just, they need to be hearing it, so you're saying the word, they need to be seeing it and writing it. So we've done all that. The 4 pages that are allowed in this, that are assigned in the workbook, are adequate and very good. I don't have him do the practice worksheets. I didn't order that. I used it. I had ordered it last year and didn't need it, and thought that the workbook for Phonics Workbook was plenty. But you can see in the teacher's manual the practice pages. They give the answer keys for the practice pages, and there's 3 practice pages for this lesson as an example. But I feel like it was just overkill. The 4 pages in the Phonics Workbook are plenty. So after the first, after all the vowels are introduced, which takes like the first 2 weeks, then they start to introduce consonants. And so the child is to read the consonant, and then they use a slide as a tool to get them to go and then put it together, sa. And like the regular phonics, any regular phonics will have you do like the ladders, I think they're called, where you go sa, sa, si, sa, sa, and you practice those short vowel added with consonant, and they're called word helpers, and then they get add a consonant at the end, and you can make 3-letter words, which is what we did today. We're in our 3rd week of school. So he's now reading these 3-letter words, and at the beginning of the lesson, you do some review, and like I said, I just go open his workbook and have him review sounds in the workbook. Okay, so it takes us about half an hour, and it's going well.